This is Abbie, and you are listening to Stories Lived, Stories Told. Today is our very first conversation episode, and we are talking to Robbie Williford. And that's where I'm going to stop, because I want to try to avoid doing the traditional podcast guest introduction and instead just let Robbie tell us who he is. So let's jump right in. So Robbie, who are you? And by that, I want you to tell us, what is the story that you tell about yourself?
What a great first question. So who am I? I was thinking about this question. I feel like I think about this question every month. Who am I this month?
Yeah.
At least since COVID started, I feel like I've developed a mindset of I can't be thinking too far ahead because we don't know where things will be. So like just this month, who am I?
Sure.
And what am I doing this month that is feeding whatever story it is that I'm telling about myself, either to myself or to other people? But my immediate answer is to talk a little bit about who I've been, because I think all the places that I've been and all the people that are important to me in my life over the course of the first 31 years have helped me become who I am today. So I am a Michigander. I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan. It's a big part of who I am as a person. It's funny when I even do interviews like for jobs, they'll say, "Tell us a little about yourself." And the first thing I say is, "I'm from Flint, Michigan. I'm proud to be from Flint, Michigan." And I usually say it's the same Flint, Michigan that's in the news. It has been in the news since 2014. But I'm very proud. I spent my first 18 years there living and being in community with people. And it's a big part of who I am. I still have family there. So I haven't been back in really since COVID started in any long-term way, but it is something that I think about every day and that I wear on my sleeve, metaphorically speaking. And so that's a big part of who I am. I would say I'm also an educator. I'm someone who, professionally and personally, I find myself being an educator for myself, for others, for students. I work in higher education, so that's a part of who I am quite a bit, both in the past, both as an instructor and just as a professional living and being in community with students, which is not a job that a lot of people are like, I want to do that all the time. I want to live in a residence hall until I'm in my 30s. But yeah, so I think I'm an educator. I'm a learner. I'm somebody who it's an everyday thing for me. I'm constantly reading or taking in information. I'm trying to understand perspectives on things that are important to me, trying to understand people's stories and how they came to be and what it takes to be in community with them. And yeah. And then the story I tell about myself, it's funny. I actually don't tell a whole lot of stories about myself. I was just telling someone the other day that I don't often tell stories unless I'm asked to, especially about myself. And so people often, I think mostly in my work, students and coworkers will often be like, I don't really know much about Robbie. And it's because I don't like lead with telling people about myself. I will wait until they ask me. And then it's almost like I'm an open book. I'll just ask one question and it's like, oh, I got 1,000 answers to that. So yeah. So that's what I would say is I don't really tell stories about myself until people ask me. But when they do, and it seems like a genuine ask, like, yes, I want to know this about you, then I will open up my whole world and give people a peek as to who I am and the things that I like to do and the person that I want to be.
Yeah, I think there is storytelling on two levels of what are the stories you tell about yourself day to day, or letting people into the stories of your life, but then overall, maybe that narrative that you're telling about yourself. Since you're maybe not telling the little stories day to day, my next question is, what story do other people tell about you, either to you or to other people? And I'll answer this in part two. But I'm curious what stories you hear other people telling back to you.
I would say the people that I pay attention to the most in terms of when someone's telling me about me are my closest friends and my family. So it depends on who you ask. But I think if my mom were here, or my sister or my brother were here, they would tell you something different than what my 2 or 3 best friends would say. I think some of the stories that they would tell are how I am quiet and reserved and introverted. But I have this sort of like rich inner world that I don't like. I spend a lot of time inside of my body and inside of my mind, for better or for worse. They would probably tell you that I care way too much about what other people think of me, which is true and is not true. Over the last couple of years, especially, I've been like, I don't really care what people think of me as long as I'm not harming anyone and I'm staying true to who I am. Then it shouldn't matter what the next person thinks. But I care deeply about what my friends think about me. And so they would probably still tell you that like he just cares way too much about what other people think of him. I think people would also tell you that I can at times be a very impassioned person, especially when it comes to things that I care most about. So, as an educator, I do care about the holistic person that I'm getting to work with, whoever that is, whether it's in a classroom or in my office in a one-on-one or in an interview setting. I care about the person that I'm with and I want to see them thrive. And I am fundamentally of the belief to my core that we have enough for everyone to thrive. We have enough resources. We have enough opportunities for everyone to have exactly what they need to live their life in abundance. And I can get very impassioned about that. So my friends would tell you about that. I think when I'm in conversation with people, some people would tell you that I am, and I heard this exact quote, some people would tell you that I am Cobra quick when it comes to defending the people that I love and the causes that I care deeply about, which has helped me really think through who I am as a listener and how I am paying attention to the stories that other people are telling. Because sometimes I get to a point where I'm like ready to, you're saying something that I'm like, I can't believe for the life of me that you would say something like that. And it's usually something that's so off the wall and outlandish. Like you could probably think of 10 different things right off the top of your head right now, Abbie. But somebody might say something like, just for example, I think this is a true elementary example. I think Oreos are the best Oreos. There's no other cookie that's better than that. Or I should say Oreos are the best cookie. There's no other cookie that's better than that. And I can be very quick to be like, I don't understand how you came to that conclusion and I need to know. So some people would tell you I'm Cobra quick when it comes to fighting for the things that I love and care most about. I don't think Oreos are the best cookie, but and then I think people would tell you that I'm a writer and a reflective person. I will and sort of am always writing about things that are happening in my life or people that are, writing about people that are close with me. And I write a lot about my friends and my friendships and the complexities of that and weaving in and out of friendships with other people. And how as we get older, this thing I've been writing about recently is how as we get older, our friendship groups either become really, really strong, tight-knit bond, or you just start to drift from people. And I want to understand both of those things. How do we get to a point where we're drifting from someone? How does that happen? Especially if it's like both sides are like, I want to be your friend. I want to be in friendship with you. So yeah, I think those are you would probably most often hear some of the stories people would tell about me, about who I am as a person and why I exist the way that I do.
I think your answer to that just shows your self-awareness because, like you said, for better or worse, you are a listener. And so while you might not feel like you are sharing your stories all the time, you have such an interesting perspective because you are the collector of other people's stories. Because, for me personally, a story I'm telling about you is that you are someone that I see as passionate. And another word I'd use to describe you is curious. And I mean that in the sense that you talked about, you always want to be learning or you're trying to better understand people. And so I see that curiosity come out in your listening and genuine care for other people. And I think you and I are the same in that way with the role we see our relationships playing in our life. And we just want to understand them because to me, it's so important. And so it deserves that intentionality. And I know we have different opinions on the word intentionality. Yeah. So that might be something to get into also.
I love that.
But I think you were pretty self-aware on your answer to that question of how people see you. And I think the rich inner world is a really interesting point because our, society or whatever is geared towards the extroverts and people who produce things that are tangible and that you can see. But I think some of my most important thoughts or revelations in my life are things that have happened within me. And just because they're not tangible doesn't mean they're not real or have a real impact on me. And I think that's something you maybe experienced too.
Oh yeah. In 10 different ways right now. I would agree with you. It's interesting. You mentioned curious, and I should have said that too, because a lot of people dub me as curious. It's funny. I have an educational group with two other people, two of my very close friends, Michael King and Danny Badgett. And each of us, we talk about this all the time, how each of us represent something different in this group. So Michael is sort of the empathetic person. He leads with empathy. He also leads with courage, perhaps more so than empathy. Danny leads with empathy first and is always the first to listen and try to make sense of the world and the people. And I lead with the sense of curiosity. And when you put the three of us together, it's like this puzzle, this 3-piece puzzle that comes together, and we build spaces for people to work through tough things, difficult things, hard things. And so, but it's funny that you mentioned curious, because that's what they would the two of them specifically would say that about me.
Well, I like you using the language of giving the space to people to process tough things, because that's my hope for this podcast, is that it's for me and for the people I have on the podcast can be that space. But also to those listening is like modeling almost of, because my whole thesis is some people haven't had the space to share their stories. And that kind of takes me into the next thing I want to talk to you about, which you've tapped on a little bit, is how comfortable you personally feel telling your own stories, whether that is what we talked about, the little stories day to day, or your overall narrative. But I wonder if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, I could tell you a little bit about it. It's something that I've started to find myself feel more comfortable with over the last few years. I think it depends on the audience, the people that are around listening, and it depends on what stories people want to know about. Like, if you want to know, just give me a timeline of what major life events have happened. That's easy. I'm happy to do that, and love that I have the autonomy to tell you the things that I think are the most important. But for things that are a little bit more vulnerable, or perhaps more that have more depth, or that are maybe unhealed areas, I would say I have a really difficult time. Even though I want to be able to tell that story to someone, I don't always have the right words, and I don't always know exactly what I'm feeling about it. So when I'm in conversation, I'm trying to convey something to someone, and I want to be understood. I don't want advice. I don't want somebody to tell me what I should be feeling or doing. I just want somebody to hear me and understand me. But when I can't give them the words to do that, it feels as if I'm like almost failing to tell a story about myself. And then I ask myself all kinds of questions because I have anxiety. All kinds of questions like, well, do they even care about the answer, or were they even listening, or whatnot? So it depends. But I think more often than not, I am very comfortable owning the stories, owning my own lived experiences and stories that are really important to me. It just is on a sliding scale, depending on audience and depending on how genuine somebody is in wanting to know what the answer is.
I think comfortable is the operative word of that question, because I wonder for you if you would describe it as, since you said you're not someone that's maybe sharing your stories all the time, is that because of a discomfort or because of something else you'd attribute it to?
Well, I think when you asked the question, the first thing I thought of was what are my most vulnerable stories, and is it comfort that I feel with those stories, or is it discomfort? And to me, it's that I haven't fully worked through those stories to know how they have impacted me or to know how they continue to show up in my life. Right. And so there's a discomfort with not knowing. And there's I would say, feeling of not being the storyteller because there's so many other factors that go into it that I don't know about, that is it my story to tell, even though it is my story. It's a part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe not a full answer, but so for example, like if somebody's asking me about my father who passed away in 2019, I have, and this is the story that I'd be happy to tell if we had a lot more time, because there's a lot to it. But basically, over the course of my life, my father and I hadn't had the best relationship. There were times when we were close, and there were times when we were not close. But for most of my teenage years and probably a lot of my 20s, I would say I harbored a ton of resentment towards him and a lot of anger. I would say 10 years ago, I'd probably categorize it as hate, but I don't think it was actually hate. I think it was actually, I wanted to be loved by him, and it felt as if he didn't have the capacity to do that. And then he passed away, and I had regrets and felt a lot of resentment towards myself. So if somebody asks me about that, you can imagine there's some discomfort. You can imagine, even if you haven't experienced the loss of a parent, you can imagine what somebody might feel. And me not having the right words to share about it makes me feel as if I can't communicate to someone about that experience for me, which then makes me feel like I'm not the narrator of my own story.
I think we both, have the idea, to me, that words are very powerful. And so having the right language is important to me because, like you said, I want to be understood and I want to do my stories justice. Yes. By being able to, especially if I'm talking about my feelings, how I felt about a certain event that happened to me or that I was a part of. Yeah. It's important to me to have the right language and to get my message across. I think, like you were talking about, some people might say you care about other people's opinions too much, or just, care about them, period. Is that I also had a period of my life, probably high school, where I got really good at controlling what people thought of me. Because of whatever reasons, I was able to pick up on, okay, if I act this way, this is how people are going to respond. So I can get the favorable reactions. I can make sure I'm in everybody's good graces. And so it's only really been recently that I've gotten to the point of, I don't need everybody to view me favorably, because that's me doing a lot of work to make that happen. And so talking about what are the stories other people are telling about us, I'm really trying to focus on, well, who does that matter to me? There are people that I do care what story they're telling about me, because I value the relationship or respect them. But again, not everybody.
That's tough.
It is.
It's really tough.
But I think, like you're saying, the part of the comfort of telling your story doesn't exist in a vacuum. Part of that comfort is not just within you, but it is your audience. Who are you comfortable sharing it with? How do they make you feel comfortable?
Yeah, well, and just to add on to it a little bit, I mentioned that I was a writer. I've been creatively writing for half of my life now, which is strange to think about. But one of the things early on as a writer, when I would write something that I want to publish or put onto the internet or put on a blog or something, I would write everything down and then edit it, almost like a really bad editor. I'd edit all the good parts out because I wanted people, when they read it, to think a certain thing about me. And what I realized is I can't control what other people think. And as soon as I publish something, it's no longer mine. Right. I mean, it might be my story, but you could read it, Abbie, and it is yours now. It belongs to the reader. at
You
least
are
from my
putting it
perspective.
in your audience's hands, and you have
Yep.
to trust them
Yep.
to get out of it what they need to.
Yes, 100% that.
Mm-hmm.
So then I stopped for a long time. I was like that, and I stopped maybe 5 years ago doing it so much for wanting to be seen a certain way. And I was just like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody might read this and be like, I don't understand anything that he just said. And that's fine. And that's fine. But some people, when I write something and put it out there, they will reach out to me and be like, hey, this line resonated, or this piece, I want to talk more about this piece with you, or whatever. So
I think maybe we don't always see it at first because a lot of the messages we receive are implicit through, personal relationships. We have people in our lives that have told us messages, or societally the messages that we're being told. And I think you, like you said, are a reflective person. So I know that's something that has probably entered your mind before I'm even asking this question. But I want to know what messages you've received about your stories, maybe when you have told them or as they were happening, that made you feel like they were something you could share, or if they were not something you could share.
Yeah, I mean, I receive all kinds of messages from people that give me signals that tell me, oh, okay, this is something that I can share, that I feel safe to share, that I'm being given the space to share. If I feel safe, I need to open myself up and not talk myself out of a good thing and just share the story. So some of the things that I think of that are almost immediate, like an immediate message that would make me feel safe, is if somebody says some variation of, I see you, I hear you, I resonate with what you're saying, or what, the words that you're using or the things that you're saying make a lot of sense to me. Those things to me make me feel safe, because it tells me that, okay, something that I'm saying or communicating is vibrating with this person. Like it's working for them. It's getting them to step into my own story. Yeah. And then the opposite of that, to me, it's the things that people don't say sometimes that make me feel as if I am not safe to share something.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, it won't be a surprise if people are listening to this, but I'll say it anyway. I have specific identities that allow me to inherently tell a story, and people will listen. So I don't have to, more often than not, I don't have to work extra for people to hear what I'm saying or to read what I'm writing, or any combination of those two things. But so knowing the privileges that come with who I am, the identities that I have, and the stories that I live, and the power that's associated with it, right. Knowing that, I would say for most of my life, maybe not most, but maybe a little more than half of my life, I haven't felt unsafe to share stories. But when I do, it's things like people's body language communicating to me that they don't really care. Or I would say, and this is nothing against journalists. I want you to hear me say that. It's nothing against journalists, but it's almost like a journalistic, like, I need to tease out the story that I want to tell about you. So I'm going to ask you specific questions that have an agenda. You don't really care to represent my full story.
Right.
You just want to know the parts that you want to be able to tell. And that to me makes me feel like it makes me close up. Like I don't want to share with someone more overt things like it's not that deep, or you're overreacting, or you're being dramatic, or that like somebody trying to gaslight me. Like, that's not true. That didn't happen. Those are things that I'm like, well, I don't feel safe to tell a story or to be around you anymore.
Right. I'm very sensitive to the idea of being considered high maintenance.
Yes.
And I think that's really challenging, and stems off of what you said, in that, especially as a woman, the idea that I need to contort myself to be more palatable to people.
Right.
So this is a slight detour, but it's something I want to talk to you about, and let me know if I'm projecting onto you.
No, it's okay.
But I think a lot about the idea of being two, as in TOO, ... in that I think a lot of ways, as a woman, that I've been told I am too ... for like my identity. If you're expecting women to be quiet or passive in whatever way, if I'm stepping into a leadership role, I am maybe in the back of my mind have a fear of being considered too loud, too bossy, too, fill in the blank. And that's something that informs what stories I think I'm allowed to tell, on a much broader sense than just what an individual is giving to me. And so I wonder if that's something you experience of people telling you are too ... fill in the blank. One that I wonder if it overlaps for us, just based on our interaction, is that we might be too emotional.
Yep. I was going to say that. Yeah. Yeah. It's, there's several boxes that I think society wants me to fall into as a man.
Yep.
And so one of those boxes is unexpressive, unemotional, only expressive when it's anger or you're at a wedding or a funeral.
Right. The designated times.
Right. And so when I don't adhere to those at all and don't care much for them, I am too emotional, or, I'm not going to, there's a lot of probably vulgar things that you could imagine that your listeners could imagine that somebody might say to a man who is expressing emotion. Right. And so, yes, 100%. And I've been told that my entire life, which makes me definitely feel unsafe. Yeah. And I don't want to be around you if you're going to say that to me.
Right.
So maybe that's why I have a smaller inner circle, because those people don't do that. Don't do that for me at all. Yeah.
Right. I think that's good to have that smaller inner circle.
I think so too.
To have that trust. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, Robbie, I'm gonna, put you on the spot now. I know that this is not natural for you.
Yes.
But tell me your story.
Tell me your story. Okay. Tell you my story.
Yes.
In some ways, I'm telling me my story too.
Tell both of us your story.
Okay. Thank you.
All of us, your story.
My story, I like to start linear and then it just goes all over the place. So I was born in Flint, Michigan to Elizabeth and Robin. And I was born to a family that was very loving and open. And right around turning 1 year old, I should say, my father left my mother for another woman. And my mom was a single mother working as a waitress and also as a general manager she worked her way up from waitress to general manager. And she had 2 children. So my older sister is 2 years older than me. And those are some of the earliest memories I have, is being at home and my mom having to work all the time and being this sort of really timid and painfully shy, like excruciatingly painfully shy person as a kid. And then my mom met who I consider to be my dad. So I have my father, my biological father, and then my dad, this man that helped raise me. And when I was, I think 9 or 10, I think it's 9, my brother was born. My little brother was born. And then I became a middle child. Used to be the baby of the family, the favorite. And then I was replaced by my brother. No, I say at the time I did feel that way, but
I'm sure a 9-year-old.
Oh my gosh. I was like, what the heck? I'm supposed to be the baby, right? But then I was a middle child. And, if you ask me, I think I was a little bit forgotten for a little while. And that contributed pretty significantly to my sense of self and my sense of identity, like who I am as a person, what I like to do. The things that I knew I loved to do was read and write. And so you could find me reading anything over the course of my young lad days, all the way through preteen. And then through my teenage years, I was a reader and a writer, and I wanted to be around stories. And some things that I've been told I used to do, and I remember this vaguely, but I used to wake up really early in the mornings and we would get the paper and I would just sit and read the paper at the living room table and would just consume all of it and read it from front to back. And that has always been part of who I am, as just a reader, somebody I love fiction, creative nonfiction, memoir, historical fiction, things like that. And that's part of who I am. It's part of who I've always been. But I started growing up and started to try to figure out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. I loved playing sports in high school. And I met a couple of really close friends that I'm still in loose contact with from high school. And yeah, I would say I didn't peak in my high school years until I was a senior. and it was a little too late. And I was like, well, I guess I have to go to college now. So went to college, studied English and creative writing. And right around the time that I was in like leaving high school, going into college, my father had made his way back into my life. And he had gotten involved with some pretty heavy drug use. And my mom gave him the opportunity to move into our basement. They didn't get back together, but he lived in my basement during high school and helped pay the rent. And he got clean and he was able to get on his feet. But at some point in high school, at the end of high school and into college, I remember coming home. Actually, I was in college. I remember coming home and he was gone again. He had met someone online, moved to Cleveland, which is where he's originally from. And he left his car. He left most of his belongings. He took 2 suitcases. It took a bus and left. And that's when I started really resenting him. And that's when I started learning resent in a real sense and learning anger in a real sense for things that I can't control. Those things stuck with me since then. And they were a large part of who I was, who I am now. But for the better part of the last 10, 11, 12 years. And for a long time, I cut him out of my life. I didn't talk to him. I didn't want to hear from him. I thought, you weren't around for so long and now you want to be around. And why would I let you back in? This was after a few years. He tried to come back again. And I was like, I don't want any part of this. But that helped me recognize, or I shouldn't say helped me, that made me realize that I care about being loved and I care about being understood. And I wasn't feeling either of those things from him. So I shut him out and went about my life. I went into college and I excelled in college. I got involved. I was an RA. I was student body vice president. I was involved in various clubs. I got to be in positions that helped me be around other people and be in community with people and understand the things that are troubling them and understand the things that, that they are struggling with, whether that be societal or interpersonal. And I wanted to be a part of the solution for people in a way that doesn't seem like the savior as, the person that comes in and saves the day. Right. I don't like that. I don't ever want to be a part of that.
You're not trying to fix everything.
No. And again, I come back to I think we have enough resources for everyone to live comfortably and to thrive. And I want to be a part of helping to make sure policy-wise and structurally we allow for that. But anyways, in college I had the opportunity to do that, and I had a mentor that was like, you could go into student affairs, and I hadn't ever thought of that. And at the time I was studying English and creative writing, but I didn't want to be a teacher. I was just sort of coasting. And so then I went to grad school, moved from Michigan to Ohio, didn't know anybody there, started planting roots. And after 2 years, and I wasn't ready to let go of the place, but after 2 years, I got a job in Muncie, Indiana, which is where I met you. Yes. And I got to work for 4 years and really do a whole lot of things in what I think is a very beautiful community that many people hate for no reason. They just don't know. They just don't know the Muncie community, and that's fine. But is it? What a shame. Yeah. It's not fine. I think people, it's just like with Flint. People will say all kinds of stuff about a city that they've never been to, or two, that they don't ever care to really know and be a part of. And then they don't do it justice when they say things like, oh, it's boring here, there's nothing to do. But it was in Muncie and at Ball State, working there, that I had the opportunity to be an instructor. And I got to be an educator in the truest sense of the word, both inside and outside of the classroom. And that has been part of my identity inside and outside of the classroom ever since. And then when I was in the end of my first year, I think it was the end of my first year at Ball State, I had two deaths happen in my life. One was a good friend of mine who passed away really suddenly. He was a couple of years older than me. And then in April of 2017, my grandmother passed away. And my grandmother was the matriarch of our family, sort of taught me quite a bit on how to live and how to love people well. And that changed everything for me. I had not experienced a death to somebody that was close to me ever. And it changed me as a person in ways that I'm still learning. I mean, it's only been 5 years almost, but I've learned a lot about myself as a healer, as a lover, as a friend, as a brother, as a son. A lot of that I can attribute to the lessons that she taught me. And then 2 years later, my father passed away, and it was right as we were starting to build a relationship again. We had been conversing via email. He had passed away almost suddenly, and it was like a heart attack. He had, we believe he was starting to have a heart attack, and he went to go get his medication and couldn't get the top off of it, and he ended up collapsing and dying. And that devastated me in ways that I still am learning and have been in therapy for a long time trying to work through. I learned a lot about regret and a lot about shame and a lot about guilt in things that I didn't do, things that I did do that I wish I hadn't done. And so all this to say, I learned from losing people how to be a more compassionate, empathetic person towards others, and to build hope in a way that is sustainable, but also make space for and room for things that are really challenging and difficult, emotions that are really, for some folks, insurmountable. And one of those things is grief. A lot of folks they really struggle with grief, myself included still, and will for years probably. But one of the things in the last couple of years since moving on from Ball State that I found myself dealing with almost every day is grief and how it shows up. And there's so many different metaphors for it. But one of the things that I tell people, it's kind of like a leaky faucet that a plumber can't fix. Just endless, like dripping, just dripping all the time. Memories, emotions, things that come up that you can't stop. And that happen in moments where you don't expect them. You see a butterfly, or you see a book, or for me, with my father, he really loved Frank Sinatra, and my middle name is Francis after Frank Sinatra. And I remember shortly after he passed, seeing Frank Sinatra everywhere, songs coming on the radio, a postcard that I got. I was in New York City. I had gotten a postcard, or I was looking at postcards at this bookstore, and there was a Frank Sinatra one. So anyways, grief is something that I found it's a really integral part of my story, because it became front and center character in my life. And you see it show up in everything. And so it taught me to be a more compassionate human, and is teaching me things that I still probably couldn't communicate to you right now. And now as I sit here, I realize I've been talking quite a bit, but the stories that I tell, that was sort of a very abridged version, obviously. The stories that I tell always involve other people. Stories I tell about myself always involve other people, because I would not be the person that I am without the love and care and compassion that I've been given by other people.
I think it's good you mentioned that, because there's so much nuance to the human experience, which, pick whatever that means to you. There's, millions, billions of different understandings of what the human experience is. But I think that's part of what makes everybody's story. But, having
Yes.
just heard your story, really beautiful, not because it is perfect or,
Right.
happy, which I think is something people maybe, oversimplify. Happy
Yes.
is beautiful, but because it's very human, I guess, is what I would say, because I think I can tell through your storytelling that you really embrace that. And
Yeah.
I find that to be a really beautiful quality in a person, of someone that can sit with things like grief and let it be a teacher to them. And I think part of the reason why this conversation is really special to me is because of the nature of how we met in our relationship, and that you being my boss and being in the roles that we were in of community building, and we were always working for other people, is that I did a lot of storytelling and didn't ask a lot of you. I think I did to a certain extent, but I think our relationship was heavy on the side of me doing the storytelling, because by nature of our jobs, that was kind of the relationship. And so I feel like I know you.
Yeah.
But there's so many stories of your life that I don't know. And so I think it's, again, I come to you today with curiosity and a desire to understand you, because I don't want the, simple surface level of people. I think the beauty is in like the layers and the nuance. And so obviously the story that you have just told us can't encompass everything you've experienced or felt ever in your life, but I think it's very beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
So based on our job then brings me to the next question that I wanted to ask you, because again, something we've talked about in our job, we had intentional interactions.
We did.
And I just love the word intentional. I love being intentional, but you were not the biggest fan of that word. So my question to you is, tell me more about your desire to be intentional, and or the word I know that you would choose is purposeful. And what does that mean to you? What's the distinction there for you?
Yeah, I remember the conversation so vividly, because it was really one of those things where you and I wouldn't say we were arguing, but we were really like, it felt like we were really trying to understand each other, but we were holding true to what we believed. And I learned a lot about you in just that one conversation. Yeah, I think for me, I want to make sure that it makes sense. So I don't necessarily think everything has to have a purpose. I don't think everything has to be purposeful necessarily, but I think it's important to do things on purpose, things that matter to you. And I think there's a distinction between the two, just the two forms of purpose there, right? Oh, I want to be purposeful to this organization, or I want to have a purpose in my life. And I get that is a very human thing for a lot of folks. But what I'm realizing in my life right now is that not everything may have a purpose. At least that's not apparent to me. And I need to be okay with that. But to do things on purpose that matter to me, I think makes more sense to me than doing things intentionally. And I'll explain why. I don't hate the word intentional, by the way.
Sure. Yeah, that was maybe extreme of me to say.
No. I know. But I just think people use the word intentional, and it's become almost, especially in student affairs, it's become a buzzword.
Right.
People are
the meaning's lost. Yeah.
Yes. People are so numb to it because they're like, oh, okay, I have to do intentional interactions, or I have to do this program, that you have to be intentional about planning this program. And they don't really think about the real definition of the word. They don't really think about the real idea behind the word. But for me, to do something intentionally is basically to put yourself in a position or to maneuver yourself in a way that allows you, and this will make sense for folks who know what intentional interactions are, that allows you to be in community with someone. And that's so important for understanding and cultivating this idea of empathy and curiosity, both for other people, but for yourself too. But to do things on purpose, to do things that matter on purpose, to me, resonates on a deeper level. And the reason why is because to do something on purpose is to, as frequently and as sustainably and as consistently as you can, to align all of your energy or resources in a direction that you're trying to go, so that you can become something that you're trying to be. So this is how this may be an easier way I might describe it. To be intentional is like all the small habits, the small things that you're doing to get to doing something on purpose. And then doing something on purpose is a little bit bigger of a step. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. We have lots of challenging conversations with each other. and I would say politically specifically.
Sure.
We have a lot of challenging conversations, and they're really fruitful conversations. But he oftentimes him and I both will talk about what it means to do something on purpose. And one of the things we specifically talk about are, if we see injustices in the world, if we see oppression happening, what are some things that we can do on purpose to help other people so that there's less harm happening, there's less suffering happening. And the easiest answer we have to that is start where you are with what you have. You don't have to be a master's level educated person to help another person. You don't have to be, you don't even have to have a whole lot of knowledge about a certain area to be able to help in that area. It might look like having conversations with family members or having conversations with friends about tough things. It might look like volunteering your time, effort, or money, but start where you are in your communities that you're already a part of, and use the tools that you already have. And to do both of those things on purpose is going to help you learn about other tools, learn about other ways you can help other people. And it's going to give you sort of the I hate to say motivation, but it's going to inspire you in ways that you don't even know because you're not expecting it. It's going to inspire you to learn in ways that are going to help you become just a little bit more knowledgeable about a topic, a little bit more educated about a topic. That was a little bit of an aside, but that's how I would see doing something on purpose. And yeah, intentional. And when I think of intentional, this is so funny, but I think of like flossing my teeth, which I know it's so weird. Like I have to be super intentional because I always forget to do it. I'm like, oh, I need to do that. So I need to create the conditions that allow me to do it in an easier way. Maybe I need to put the floss literally in the sink.
Yeah. Write yourself a little Post-it note. Robbie, yes. Floss teeth.
Floss teeth. And the funny thing is, I had my last dentist appointment in October. I've flossed my teeth every day since then.
Congratulations, Robbie.
I maybe missed one day, but.
Well, I'm still proud of you. I think it's interesting because the flossing the teeth is, a funny example, but what you said is that you got to be intentional about creating the right circumstances around it.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to get at in my understanding of intentional. And I do agree that contexts we've been in have taken away the meaning of it, but I have my own relationship to words. And so it still has such meaning for me. And to me, it is about the big picture. So I love the idea of doing things on purpose, because I can find myself getting susceptible to this kind of fear of like, what if I get to the end of my life, look back and, I didn't really live my life according to the things that I said that I valued.
Yes.
And so to me, when I get myself in that fear, what gets me out of it is saying, okay, the big picture is too overwhelming to look at.
Yeah.
So I need to do the little things and do things on purpose every day so that when I do look back, I know that I built my life of small things on purpose.
Yes.
And I think that's really beautiful. And then to me, the intentionality is the recognizing that there's something bigger going on. And that's why like the community building was so important in our job, because whether, the residents we worked with recognized it or not, or whether, whoever in whatever community recognized it or not, we were doing things to intentionally create community. Because I think that doesn't happen on accident.
Yes.
It's not as fun for people to say you have to be intentional about creating community or making friends, because the story we've been told is that those things should just come naturally, or like building relationships, romantic relationships or friendships of like, if you have to work at it, then that's a bad relationship. Like they should just know you. They should just know exactly how to love you. But I disagree with that. And so I think having to be intentional about creating the space of a relationship. So I think we've both grown since our first conversation about intention and purpose. And so I think there's room for both.
I think so. I mean, there has to be, right? There has to be some room for both of those things, like doing things on purpose and doing things intentionally. And they're going to look different on the sliding scale of how much or how little is needed, depending on there's the context, right? People that are involved, maybe barriers that are included, right? So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And we have grown quite a bit since then. I'm proud of that too.
Well, the default for me, at least, is to take myself too seriously. And so, doing things on purpose or with intention are so important to me. So for me, it's a little bit of practice of letting go of what you mentioned at the beginning of not everything has a purpose. And that's okay, because I'm coming to learn things like rest and play are really important. So in a way, I want to be intentional about having that in my life. But then once I'm in that, I want to let that go. So it's a whole thing.
I love that. I love exactly what you just said. I love all of that. Oh, yes.
I want you to tell me more about how you relate to masculinity and your identity in that way.
When people ask me, when I talk about masculinity, my answer changes every day. It seems my relationship to masculinity changes every day. There was a time in my life where I really, really wanted to fit inside of the boxes because I didn't want to be laughed at. I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want to feel shame. I don't know anybody that wants to feel shame, but I particularly would try to avoid it like it's like I've been avoiding COVID.
Right.
Like I'll do everything that I can to stay away from feeling shame. That is what toxic masculinity is to me.
Yep.
It's doing all the things that the status quo says you have to do that makes you a man, right? So that's being unemotional, that's being stoic, that's being controlling, being in charge, being the person that makes all the rules,
being certain all the time,
and then punishing others that don't fit into that, whether that's men or not men, right?
Right.
So for me, like it started with understanding what that was. I did an activity that I have since spent a lot of time with and then facilitated for other people called the Man Box. And the purpose of that is there is this activity that anybody can do. But particularly if you get a group of people who identify as male or as a man, if you get them together and you ask them to describe the characteristics of what it means to be a man, you draw a box, a literal square. You can do it anywhere. You can do it on paper, on a whiteboard, on a computer, whatever. You ask them, what does it mean to be a man? Name the characteristics, and they'll say things like stoic or like what I just mentioned,
right?
Not expressive, strong. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then you draw a bigger box, a much bigger box around that smaller box, and everything that a man or a person could be labeled, if they don't adhere to what those rules are, what those characteristics are, you write outside of that initial box. So it could be all kinds of things. It could be sissy. It could be pansy. It could be, more often than not, it's things that make a man seem to be or have characteristics that are typically or traditionally attributed to women. Mm-hmm. Not in the good way.
No.
Right. And I'm not going to repeat it for the sake of
things much worse.
Yeah. Things that are like things that berate them and are condescending and put them down. Right. Mm-hmm. And when I first did this activity, it was like 500 light bulbs going off about all kinds of things that happened in my life. It was almost like it was like a flashback to everything that happened in my life that could be considered or attributed to this idea that I have to be a man. You gotta toughen up. There was like 500 light bulbs, and I was learning about myself in real time. That was so overwhelming. I started crying, like sobbing. And the facilitator pulled me aside after the workshop, and he talked to me like a human being and asked me how I was feeling and gave me a space to be a human being.
What does it mean to you when you say he talked to you like a human being, as opposed to what?
As opposed to having a mask on, as opposed to talking to me like I did something wrong.
The right? Way I hear it when you say it is almost like, as opposed to being a man, which not that either of you weren't, but you almost have that saying people say of like, oh, we need to talk man to man.
Yes.
And so it's, if you're saying, I need to talk to you based on your identity as a man. I'm holding you to all these standards, strong,
Exactly.
stoic, unemotional.
Yes.
But instead, the talking to you like you're a human being first.
Yeah.
And then whatever your, sex or gender identity is after that, and whatever that means to you, but that human being layer.
No, that's great. That's exactly what it was. He just talked to me like I was another person next to him, and without any expectation of how to be. And
that you were allowed to experience the full range of what it means to be human.
Yes. Yes. And really, since then, I was like, I want to talk to other men about this. And then I I put together an in-service for the RAs at Ball State.
Yeah.
And it was about what it means to be a man. And we did the man box activity. The activities for anyone that identifies in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting when I asked all of the people who identify as a man to do the activity separate from all the people who, and looking back, I could have done this 1,000 different ways, but the way I did it the first time was all the people who didn't identify as a man to be in another group. The answers were slightly different.
Right.
And that had a resounding success. Several of the people that were at that workshop reached out to me in private and asked me to have conversations with them in private without anyone else around to talk about it because they were afraid of how they'd be perceived. For them, I was a man that was willing to challenge the status quo. And so they wanted to talk through that about what is masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? Right. And so, so that's, for me, that's where I first started relating. And then it really has been since then. I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research and being in conversation with people who have done research around masculinity and how it shows up in the best ways or in the not so best ways, specifically on college campuses. But that recently has been how it shows up in the world. Mm-hmm. And I can talk for hours about this stuff, but yeah.
In the context of the things we've been talking about today is that for those people, you might have been the first person to give them that message of, hey, this part of your story, these things that you've been told that don't fit into what it means to be traditionally masculine, that don't fit in that box. You're allowed to share that is just as much a part of your story as all these other things that are more socially accepted for you to be or feel. You naturally do fall into this role of listener, educator, someone who I think is a great social support. I hope you recognize the power of that you were able to do that for somebody, because I think it's empowering. It's liberating.
Oh, it 100% is that. And I don't think I will fully understand that. Like, I understand that it is powerful for other people, but I think I only understand a fraction of what it is like for other people. And just that fraction alone is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate
you don't have to accept it. I know it's hard to take like maybe such a big like compliment as that, but like,
sure.
That's the story I'm telling about you. So that will just have to be true.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I see that. I see it very clearly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that I have been focusing a lot of my energy on in 2020, the last couple of months, truly, is how it's really friendship, just in general, friendship, and how we can be in friendships with other people. And to what degree can we be in friendship with other people? And what does that friendship look like? Where are the boundaries? In fact, I'm very fascinated by boundaries that we put up around friendship. Like, what it means to be a friend is to be able to do X, Y, and Z, but not A, B, and C, right? One of the things that is probably the easiest way to illustrate this is like for friendships, people don't typically think about friendships as people that you would kiss, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I kiss my friends hello and goodbye, right? Some people are like, that is strange. Why would you do that? Like, you should only be kissing people that you maybe are romantically interested in, perhaps. But it's funny, I was celebrating a friend's birthday this past summer. And what I noticed is that he and his friends that I didn't particularly know prior to this celebration, they would kiss each other hello and they would kiss each other goodbye. And all of them were in a relationship with someone else. like a romantic relationship. And it like was a little jarring because post that time, him and I would kiss each other like hello and goodbye. And I would do that with other people, right? The people that are comfortable with it. You wouldn't just go up and kiss a friend.
Of
right?
course. Of course.
Like obviously with consent. But yeah, I've been thinking like that's a boundary for a lot of people. They'd be like, no, don't do that. Like, I don't want that. And I think for the majority of people in my life, I wouldn't do that. There's too many boundaries that people have. And I also don't think I want to do that with everyone. But anyways, I've been thinking a lot about friendship and the boundaries that are associated with it, and the ways that we can be in relationship and in community with one another. And I am going to be starting a project about friendship, just talking to people about friendship and how they see it, and maybe struggles that people have with friendship. I hear all the time, you people leave college, they move into their late 20s, early 30s, and they're like, it's really hard to be friends with people because everybody's across the world. At some point this year, there's going to be a couple of things that I put out into the world that are exploring this idea of friendship. And it could be a range of all things. It could be how do you be in friendship with people of a different gender? How do you, what are some characteristics of friends that you look for in people, right? Or characteristics that you look for in friends? What are some boundaries you have? What are some things that you're like, if you do this, then we're not really friends anymore. If you believe this, we're not really friends, right? So that to me is something that is really fascinating. And I feel like people could talk about all the time, and it impacts everyone, right? We all have this idea of what a friend is, and we have friends probably. I don't want to assume everyone has friends because maybe not, but
sure.
You know what I mean? So,
but everybody's definition of friend is different. And if you don't know how to articulate it or you don't communicate it.
Well, and there's a broader idea behind it too, right? So I think about like friendships or being in relationship with people across cultures. And one of the things, if you were to ask me right now, what's the biggest thing that we collectively are bad at? It's that we don't have a collective mindset. We think very individually, like I'm just going to worry about myself and no one else. I'm just going to stay in my own lane and not worry about the other people that are struggling or suffering. And some of that is we're socialized to believe that. We live at least in this country, we live inside of capitalism, and that breeds this idea of individualistic thinking.
Yep.
But a part of that is also we just don't have the tools. We don't know how to think collectively. And you could insert any topic and I could talk to you about how we fail to think collectively. The thing that is most prevalent right now is people wearing masks during this pandemic, and people's refusal to wear masks because the thing that I'm hearing a lot is they're like, well, that's against my rights. It's against my constitutional right.
Right. It's a show of personal freedom.
Correct. Right. And that's fine. I'm not trying to take away people's personal freedoms,
right.
But to do that is to limit your thinking to just yourself and not everyone else around you that you can be impacting just by opening your mouth. Right.
Right.
So I think we don't know how to think about community collectively. We don't know how to do that. And we're only as strong in community as this sounds strange, but the people who are who have the most inadequate definition of what community is. We're only as strong as that person.
Yeah.
From my perspective, but we just collectively, we're not good at that. We're not good at thinking about the broader public and people that we don't even know. So I think about friendships across cultures in that way, because what I'm really trying to get at is how can we think about other people with more empathy, with more courage, with more curiosity, with more care for people being able to live and thrive. And the ways that I think on a foundational level, the way that we start to do that is to build friendships in such a way that allow us to be open to being collective in our mindset.
I'm going to use that to ask you another question, because I think you've kind of set yourself up for, different answers here. Yeah. Because part of the coordinated management of meaning theory is, the context of, it's not just me telling a story. It's not just you telling a story, but holistically, whose stories are being told and whose stories aren't being told. And if the stories are being told, are they being heard? and how are they being responded to? And so I want to know what stories you want to hear more of from others and what stories matter to you.
My short answer is I want to hear all of them and they all matter to me. And I know that sounds so like, oh, that's the easy way out of this answer. But the truth is, and you're absolutely right. I am a collector of stories. I think every story that someone tells is inherently worthy of being heard and mattering to anyone. The stories matter to people, and so if I want them to matter in such a way, then I have to believe that all of them matter. But what I'll tell you, the stories that I want to hear more of are the stories about things that we feel like we can't talk about, the things that we feel unsure about, the stories where we're like making up our minds in the middle of making up our minds, and where our minds are changing about a topic. I want to know about that. I want to know about the process of that for people. I think sometimes when we're in communication or in conversation with people, they think I have to have a finished answer, a polished answer to whatever question you give me. And the reality is we might, but for even me in this conversation, in the however many questions you've already asked, I don't have finished answers to most of them because none of my stories are finished. They're still living inside of me, and I'm still living them out and figuring things out about myself. But I want to hear I want to hear people talk about or tell stories about things that we don't talk about, right? Grief is obviously one of them, but heartbreak and joy and how we wrestle with something that's extremely difficult inside of us that we have never shared before. I think if we're going to normalize anything, it's that, right? This idea that we have the ability, we have some language that we can use. Tell the story with the language that we have now. Start where you're at with what you have and see what happens. In terms of specifically other groups, I think any group of people that are different from me are the ones that I care most about in terms of how I seek them out, right? Obviously, I want to talk with other people that have similar stories than me too, because I learn a lot about myself. But the things that I am most impacted by, meaning the things that I learn the most from are the stories that I hear from people that are nothing like me. So that could mean I want to hear stories about, at least recently, I've been seeking out stories about particularly trans and non-binary people's experiences with the medical industry and how they navigate conversations and how they navigate decisions. I've also been seeking out stories, particularly in the last 3 months, I've been seeking out stories about Black women and how stories are handed down as a tradition, right? I think of, we lost bell hooks very recently. Right. And I've been very impacted by bell hooks, but I'm also very impacted by Audre Lorde.
Yep.
And both of them are two people that I wrote when I was taking the certificate classes at Ball State for college and university teaching. I wrote my final paper on Audre Lorde, bell hooks, and Alice Walker and how they tell stories about navigating the world. And I just learned so much about that and feel like I'm able to better understand them as people, but also people like them in a way that I hadn't before. So I'm eager and want to hear more stories in that way. And then the stories that matter to me, all of them, yes, but the ones that matter to me lately are the ones that are so raw and tell the full picture in an unfiltered way. They put it out there and let people hear it in an unfiltered, unabashed way. I don't even know how to describe to you. Like, and it comes in so many different mediums. It could be in song, in prayer, in canvas, in speech, in theater. I just love stories like that. I want to be around them all the time. So those are the stories that matter to me.
I love that because I think just from my own personal experience that those are the stories we least want to tell about ourselves, of ones of us where we made a mistake or we were imperfect. But they're the stories we most want to hear from other people because of what you just talked about is how we feel when you do hear a story like that, because it's powerful and And I want to go back to what you were saying earlier about what stories you want to hear. And you just brought this to my mind, which is, a whole other podcast. But the idea that a lot of times men's stories or white men's stories are taken as this is a story about what it means to be human. And then, the stories of Black women or people who are transgender are, oh, that's a story about what it means to be a Black woman, or that is a story for transgender people, rather than this is also a story about what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Starting like having a shift there, I think is an important mindset to really purposefully, intentionally, whatever you want to say, think about it as these are stories about humanity.
Yes.
And even if I don't share X, Y, or Z identity with the author or creator of this story, doesn't mean it's not for me.
Absolutely. I love that. Oh.
Final question.
Okay.
So coordinated management of meaning, the kind of core belief of it is that persons in conversation co-construct their social realities. Mm-hmm. So I'll let you interpret that how you will. But my last question for you then is, leaving this podcast, continuing on with the rest of your story that you're currently living, what are you trying to create in your social world?
What a great question to end on. Lately, what I'm trying to create in my social world is imagination. I think about it almost constantly. And I think about it in a way, I think about cultivating an imagination in such a way that is like we can create the world we want to live in. We have the ability. We have people who already have other avenues for a better world to live in. And it starts in the imagination. Think of any movement between the beginning of time and now. Think of any movement. It started in someone's brain. It started as an imaginative thing. Somebody thought of a better world and then put material in motion there and allowed it to become what it is. And it took a lot of people, right? And so for me, what I hope to help create for other people and for myself is just imagination. What are the things that we can do to help cultivate that and make it a daily practice? What are the institutions and rules and policies that are inherently harmful, and how can we work together to imagine alternatives that allow people to not be harmed, to not experience trauma in such a way that they have and that we have experienced it? How can we imagine better conditions, and what do we need to do to get there? That to me is what I'm trying to create in my social world. And I have conversations with family. I have conversations with friends. I talk about it at work. I talk about it in ways that are inquisitive and are pushing boundaries. When somebody says that's just the way it is, I ask why. Who said it has to be that way? All of the rules that we've created have been created by people, most often by white men, but people, which means we can change them. Nothing is set in stone. We want to think that it is because it's super easy and comfortable to think that it is, but we can change. We can change things. We have the ability to do it. So let's just do it. Why are we waiting? So for me, it's how can I help cultivate imagination and push the boundaries so that we can live in a world where everyone can thrive.